Out here the land feels endless. Mile after mile of open desert, nothing but sand, rock, and a sky so wide it swallows every sound. But in a lonely patch of ground, where the wind has carved strange shapes into the earth, there is something that should not be here. A slab of heavy steel, half buried in sand, sits like a forgotten wound. It isn't a rock. It isn't a ruin from ancient times. It's a door, paint faded to a dull red, bolts rusted, edges eaten by years of heat and cold. A door built by men in uniform. A door that leads down. Once, this place was alive. Engines rumbled under the surface. Voices barked orders in narrow hallways. Weapons and radios were stored behind walls thicker than a tank's armor. This was a stronghold meant to hold through a war. It was meant to stay hidden from the world above, and yet here it is, silent and exposed, waiting in the open sun. Nobody is supposed to know what lies beneath. The official maps show nothing. Locals tell quiet stories of soldiers who vanished overnight, of trucks that rolled away under moonlight and never returned. No signs, no warnings, just a steel door standing guard over a hollow earth. I stand here now with the wind at my back, staring at the entrance. The sand shifts across my boots. The air is dry, but it carries a smell, old metal and something stale, like a room sealed for years. Somewhere below, the base sleeps. Miles of tunnels, empty bunks, operations once too secret to speak of, and the question that hangs heavier than the desert heat. Why did they leave? Why build a fortress strong enough to outlast a war and then walk away without a fight? What waits in the dark could tell the story of a war that never made the headlines. It could be nothing but empty rooms, or it could be something the world was never meant to see. Before we open this door, hit subscribe and stay with us, because what waits in the dark beneath the battlefield still raises questions no report has ever answered. Every base has a reason for being. Some are built on open ground where runways stretch for miles. Others hide in mountains or forests. But a base like this, buried under dirt and rock, is built for one purpose: survival. During the long years of war, commanders knew that the fight could change in a single night. Artillery could pound a position until nothing stood. Mortars could rain down without warning. An underground base meant life. It meant a place where a command team could stay alive even when everything above was burning. Inside these hidden strongholds, soldiers planned missions that stretched far beyond the next hill. Thick doors sealed against blast waves. Walls lined with reinforced steel kept the air steady and the radios clear. Generators hummed day and night to power screens and maps where red lights tracked friendly patrols and enemy movements. Down here, time didn't matter. There's no sunrise, no sunset. Only the rhythm of duty and the distant echo of a war that never stopped. The one we stand over now was carved into a stretch of desert that offered cover and confusion. Far from cities, far from easy supply routes. Close enough to key roads and mountain passes to matter when a mission went wrong. The men who served here knew it as a safe house, a lifeline, and sometimes a trap. If the enemy ever found it, escape would be nearly impossible. Maps from old briefings show how carefully it was hidden. Satellite images reveal nothing but sand and rock. Aerial photos from the time show only a faint outline that could be mistaken for a shadow. The soldiers who rotated through here tell the same story. No signposts, no base name, not even a road that led straight in. You either knew the route or you didn't come back. This was a base built for shadows, made to vanish into the landscape, even while hundreds of men worked inside. Every hallway, every blast door, every supply room had a purpose. Food and water for weeks. Medical gear for the wounded. Communication gear to call strikes or rescue teams without ever revealing a position. And somewhere deep below, a war room where decisions were made that never reached a news report, standing above it now. It's hard to believe anyone ever left. The structure is strong enough to last a lifetime. The walls were built to hold against bombs and time itself. But someone, somewhere, decided it had to disappear. One order, and the heart of the base went silent. Engines shut down. Radios went dark. Men packed their gear and walked away. It wasn't built to be seen, but someone, somewhere, decided it had to disappear. The steel door groaned as it gave way, and a rush of air slid past my face, cool, dry, and carrying a faint smell of rust and oil. The desert heat vanished the second I stepped through. It felt like walking into a different world. The air was heavy, still, the kind of stillness that makes your own heartbeat sound too loud. My boots landed on a narrow concrete ramp, slick with sand and fine dust. Each step echoed down a hallway that disappeared into black. The walls were coated in peeling paint, flakes curling like old skin, revealing the raw concrete underneath. A single overhead light flickered and hummed, its glow stretching just far enough to show the next few feet before darkness swallowed the rest. I paused. The silence was sharp, no wind, no distant engines, no life. Just the soft sound of sand trickling down somewhere deep in the base. Places like this are built to keep the outside world out, but standing there, it felt more like the world had been locked away from whatever still lingered inside. A faded sign hung crooked on the wall. The stenciled letters were barely visible, but the outline of a once familiar word, mess, was clear enough. The mess hall. Soldiers once lined up here for coffee and rations. Now, only empty benches remained, their metal frames rusted and cold. On one table sat a dented canteen, its strapped stiff with age. Whoever left it must have thought they'd come back. They never did. The temperature dropped as I moved deeper. My breath floated in faint clouds, and every sound, my footsteps, the scrape of grit, seemed too loud. A door stood half open on the left, revealing a room full of bunks. Thin mattresses were still in place, some with blankets folded tight, military corners sharp, even after years. It looked like the men had stepped out for a smoke and never returned. That's when I felt it, that prickle along the back of the neck. Like someone was watching, not the kind of fear that makes you run, but the quiet alarm that every soldier knows. The sense that you are no longer alone. I stopped and listened. Nothing. Just the slow drip of water from a pipe hidden in the dark. This was the first real taste of the unknown. Not ghosts, not stories, just the heavy reminder that this was once alive with voices, orders, and footsteps. Now, it was a shell, and I was walking through the shadow it left behind. If you were standing here, would you keep going? Or would you turn back toward the light? Tell me in the comments, because the next step takes us deeper, where the air grows colder and the silence carries the weight of things long buried. The hallway widened into a cluster of small rooms, each one holding pieces of a life paused in mid-breath. The first door opened to a locker bay. Rows of metal lockers stood like sentries, their paint chipped and dented from years of use. I ran my hand across one and felt the faint groove of a name scratched into the steel, Martinez. Another locker carried a set of initials and a date. Tiny marks, but enough to remind you that real men once stood here, gearing up for missions most of us will never know about. On the floor, a tattered playing card lay, face up, 7 of hearts, its edges yellowed and soft. Nearby, a single boot rested under a bench, laces still knotted tight, like its owner might come back to claim it after a shift. A dented coffee mug sat on a shelf, still half full, with a crust of black sludge at the bottom. Someone once set it down mid-sip, maybe to answer a call, maybe to grab a few minutes of sleep. It never got picked up. Life down here was its own kind of war. Long hours of waiting. Meals eaten in the hum of recycled air. Soldiers rotating through 12-hour shifts, counting the days by the sound of generators and the buzz of fluorescent lights. One soldier once described it to me years ago. You lose track of time. You start to measure life by the next alarm, the next knock on the door. The mess hall told its own quiet story. Metal trays were stacked neatly by the sink, as if the next meal might still be served. A faded whiteboard listed a dinner menu, beef stew, cornbread, powdered lemonade, the writing smudged but still there like a stubborn memory. At the end of one table sat a chessboard frozen mid-game. 2 pawns tipped over as if the players had stepped out for just a minute. I imagined the rhythm of their days. Early briefings in the command room. Jokes traded over instant coffee. the sudden blare of a siren sending everyone scrambling into gear. Hours of silence, broken by the crackle of a radio or the heavy boots of a night patrol returning from outside. They lived beneath the ground, but every sound, every decision carried the weight of the world above. These corridors once carried the heartbeat of a war. Every step you take down here carries an echo of orders given, secrets guarded, lives lived on the edge of something we'll never fully see. And then, one night, everything stopped. No warning, no farewell, just silence. Somewhere in these walls is the answer to why. But for now, all that remains are these traces, names on lockers, cards on the floor, and a mug left waiting for a hand that never came back. The deeper we moved, the more the air itself felt heavy, as if the walls were holding a story they didn't want to give up. Past the mess hall, a long corridor led to what looked like the main operations room. Maps still clung to the walls, their edges curling from years of damp air. A black marker line cut across one of them, marking supply routes that once fed this hidden base. But every map stopped on the same date, like someone simply stopped planning the next move. Records show that one night, without warning, the men stationed here were told to pack what they could carry and leave. No ceremony, no time for goodbyes. Officially, it was called a strategic redeployment. Orders came down from higher command, citing shifting battle lines and the need to reposition forces. In military language, that sounds clean, but on the ground, it means someone stepped into a room like this and told a handful of tired soldiers that everything they'd built here was no longer theirs. Local villagers remember that night differently. Some speak of trucks moving in the dark, engines muffled, headlights blacked out. Others recall the distant rumble of helicopters long after sunset when no flights were scheduled. One man, now an old farmer, once told me he saw shadows moving across the ridgeline, silhouettes of soldiers carrying boxes and crates, marching without a word. By morning, the desert was silent. Inside, the signs of a sudden exit are everywhere. Cables yanked from walls, papers scattered like someone knocked over a desk in a hurry. A single radio headset lay on the floor of the comms room, the cord stretched tight as if someone ripped it free mid-transmission. Soldiers who served in other underground sites told me the same thing. Orders like this are rare, but not unheard of. A base can be alive one day and gone the next if intelligence shifts or a threat draws too close. Sometimes the reason is practical, too costly to hold, too risky to stay. Other times, the reason never reaches the men on the ground. They leave with questions just like we stand here now, asking them decades later. Walking through the empty rooms, you can almost picture that night. The rush of boots on concrete, the echo of shouted instructions bouncing through the tunnels, the hiss of doors sealing behind the last team to leave. One final switch flipped, and the base that once held hundreds of lives fell into darkness. And yet, even after all these years, there's a strange order to the chaos. The bunks are still made in tight military corners. Supply shelves stand half-stocked, as if someone planned to return. It's the kind of scene that makes you wonder if the evacuation was meant to be temporary, a pause that somehow became permanent. What we found in the deepest chamber raises a question no official report will answer. Stay with us, because the next room holds something that even the cleanest military file can't explain. The stairs leading down to the lower section were narrow and slick with condensation. Each step carried a dull metallic ring that faded into a thick silence. The deeper we went, the colder it became. My breath fogged in the beam of my flashlight, hanging in the air like a ghost that didn't want to leave. At the bottom waited a set of heavy blast doors. The steel was scarred with rust, but still solid, built to hold back shockwaves and firestorms. Someone had scratched a single word across the paint, black. It was barely visible under years of grime, but the letters were there, sharp and deliberate. Bases like this often used color codes for restricted levels. Black usually meant a section reserved for high command or secure storage, places where only a handful of people ever had clearance. The first door was stuck, but the second gave after a slow, aching groan. Beyond, it stretched a corridor that felt different from the upper levels. The air was thicker, stale, and bitter with the smell of old fuel. The concrete floor showed spiderweb cracks, small but deep enough to swallow a boot heel if you weren't careful. I kept my light low, watching for loose panels and open grates. Down here, a single wrong step could mean a twisted ankle or worse. The rooms on this level were built for purpose, not comfort. Thick-walled communications chambers lined one side, their doors layered with insulation. A rusted rack of signal equipment stood in one corner, its dials frozen mid-turn. To my surprise, a faint hum still came from the far end of the hall. It wasn't loud, more like the soft buzz of a dying fluorescent bulb, but it was enough to raise the hair on the back of my neck. Somewhere in this dead place, something was still alive. Maybe a backup generator, maybe an old relay locked in a loop. Since the night the base was abandoned, military manuals described these black levels as nerve centers. In a war zone, this is where encrypted orders were sent and received. Thick concrete kept signals contained and explosions at bay. Supplies for weeks of lockdown were stacked in nearby storerooms, rations, medical gear, boxes of sealed water packs. In a siege, a team could disappear down here and survive long after the world above fell silent. But what struck me most was the sense of preparation left behind. In one chamber, a strategy board stood against the wall, its pins and strings still marking some forgotten plan. Beside it, a folding cot sat neatly made, a wool blanket folded with the precision of a barracks inspection. Whoever last occupied this room left it as if they might return the next morning, ready to continue the mission. Standing in that quiet, I could almost hear the voices of the soldiers who once worked here. Radio operators calling encoded messages, officers leaning over maps, the clatter of typewriters punching out classified updates. Now there's only the drip of water and the steady thump of my own heartbeat. This level wasn't built to be seen by outsiders. Yet here it was, open to the dark, waiting for someone to ask the question it still refuses to answer. Why was a place built to survive the worst simply left to fade beneath the earth? At the far end of the black level, a narrow side corridor opened into a room no larger than a garage. My flashlight caught the edge of a steel table covered in dust, the kind that settles only after years of still air. What lay on that table stopped me cold. The first thing I noticed was a stack of maps. Their corners were curled and their surfaces stained with water rings, but the markings were unmistakable, thick black lines of supply routes and forward operating zones. Across each map ran wide bands of red ink, blocking out sections of text. Names of towns, coordinates, entire regions, blacked out with the precision of a censor's hand. Someone had taken time to erase details, even inside a base already buried beneath the earth. Next to the maps sat a small wooden box, the kind soldiers used to keep personal belongings safe. Inside were a few letters, their paper yellowed and brittle. One envelope bore a smudged postmark and a single word written in pencil: home. The letter inside spoke of ordinary things, birthday wishes, the smell of rain back in Kansas, a promise to stay safe. The handwriting wavered halfway down the page, as if the writer was called away mid-sentence and never returned to finish. Pinned to a corkboard nearby were mission cards. Each one carried a short code name: Iron Key Silent Watch, Echo Dust. Beside each name were dates and short notes written in a hand too hurried to be neat. Some were crossed out with thick strokes. Others were left untouched, waiting for updates that never came. In one corner, a weathered field manual sat open to a section on emergency protocols. The page listed evacuation steps, the final line underlined twice: leave no trace. Yet here were traces everywhere: maps, letters, notes, items someone chose not to destroy. Whether it was oversight or defiance, no one can say. These objects speak louder than any report. They tell of soldiers planning operations, writing home, trying to keep a sense of normal in a place built for anything but, and yet, for every detail they reveal, they leave bigger gaps. What missions did those code names represent? Why were certain regions blacked out long after the base was sealed? Who wrote that unfinished letter? And where did they go when the lights went dark? I stood in that room for a long time, the beam of my flashlight sliding across redacted words and silent tokens of a life underground. These artifacts tell a story, but not the full one. Some questions remain locked behind walls we can't reach, guarded not by soldiers, but by time itself. Standing among those maps and letters, it's easy to imagine hidden agendas and secret deals. But the truth, as a few old soldiers once told me, is often far less dramatic, and in some ways far colder. Military bases go dark for reasons that rarely make headlines. Strategy changes faster than concrete can be poured. A base that sits at the center of one campaign can become useless overnight if the front line shifts or a treaty redraws the map. In war zones, commanders call it repositioning. The public hears almost nothing. The people on the ground hear a single order: pack and move. I once spoke with a retired engineer who helped design sites like this. He explained it in the plain way only a career builder can. These places are built for function, not nostalgia, he said. If a base no longer fits the mission, it's cheaper to walk away than to keep it breathing. He described how shutting down an underground facility can happen in a matter of days. Secure documents are burned or flown out. Generators are shut off. Anything too heavy or classified to move is sealed behind blast doors. After that, nature and time take over. A former radio operator who served in a similar complex in Afghanistan told me about the night his unit was ordered to leave. We got the call after midnight. No reason given. We were told to strip equipment, lock the doors, and be on the trucks before dawn. He paused for a long time before adding, "We didn't even have time to finish our coffee." Sometimes it isn't strategy at all. Security risks can force an exit. If a base is compromised, whether by intelligence leaks, shifting alliances, or local unrest, commanders may decide that silence is safer than defense. Better to seal the doors and let the desert hide what man once built. Treaties can play a part too. When agreements are signed, certain installations must vanish on paper. In those cases, the quickest way to meet a deadline is to leave everything but the most sensitive equipment behind. The public sees a formal handshake. The soldiers see a convoy disappearing into the night. And still, there are gaps no expert can close. We know why some bases are abandoned. We can guess at others. But here, in this black level, where maps are redacted and missions are left unfinished, the silence leaves room for questions that no report will ever settle. Even the veterans I've spoken with admit that some details remain sealed beyond their clearance. Need know, they call it. And sometimes, even the ones who lived it never truly know. Walking back through the corridors, I kept noticing the small details, the ones that make this more than concrete and steel. The scuffed floors where boots once pounded in rhythm. The tables where soldiers ate meals that were never quiet, always punctuated by laughter, conversation, or sometimes sharp orders. The faded names carved into lockers, each a mark of someone who lived, breathed, and worked here under conditions most of us can't imagine. Standing in the mess hall, I could almost hear the echoes of the past. The clang of metal trays, the murmur of voices planning patrols, the distant laughter of a soldier joking about another's poor aim at the firing range. These walls remember. They remember fear and courage, boredom and alertness, the small acts of kindness and the sudden, overwhelming moments of danger that came without warning. It hits you. The cost of war isn't measured only in lives lost in battle. It lingers in places like this. It lingers in abandoned corridors and sealed rooms. It lingers in the air that still smells faintly of diesel and dust. Every artifact, every note left behind, every faint hum of a generator frozen in time carries the weight of human effort and human sacrifice. And there's a quiet truth in it. The men who served here did what they were asked, knowing the danger, knowing they might never return. They left a footprint in the desert and below the earth, one that no map can fully capture. These halls aren't haunted by ghosts, they're haunted by memory, by the bravery and fear of those who carried out their duties often unseen and unthanked. So, I ask you, sitting there watching, what should happen to places like this? Should they be preserved for history, sealed forever, or allowed to crumble and let nature reclaim them? Because wherever this base ends, its story remains, and the men who walked these holes deserve to be remembered. The walk back toward the surface felt slower than the descent. Every step on the worn concrete echoed through the empty tunnels, a sound that seemed louder because nothing else moved. Dust stirred underfoot, catching in the faint beams of my flashlight. The walls, once alive with orders and purpose, now pressed in like silent witnesses, holding every secret and every moment of life that had passed through here. I paused at each junction, half expecting to see a shadow move or hear a whisper of voices long gone. But there was nothing, only the steady rhythm of my own heartbeat and the distant hum of a generator that might have been frozen in time. As the ramp tilted upward and the sunlight began to reach the edges of the stairwell, the contrast hit me. The desert above was harsh and brilliant, almost blinding after the darkness. The wind carried sand across the rocks, indifferent to the tunnels below. The base slept again, hiding its stories beneath layers of concrete, steel, and dust. I stepped out onto the hot sand, feeling the dry wind on my face, the world alive above and silent below. Every corridor, every chamber, every artifact left behind still held its secrets. And for now, those secrets would stay where they were, waiting for someone willing to walk these halls again. This isn't the only base the world forgot. In our next episode, we explore another underground fortress, one with a mystery even deeper than this, and a story that will challenge everything we think we know about what lies beneath the battlefield. As we stand here, the desert wind at our backs, one question hangs heavier than the heat. Why was this base sealed overnight? What orders were given? And what plans were left unfinished beneath the dust and steel? We may never know the full answer, but the traces remain: maps, letters, and walls that once carried the rhythm of soldiers' lives. These holes remind us that history is not only written in books or on battlefields, but also in the places the world tried to forget. If you found this journey as gripping as we did, tap the like button. It tells us to keep bringing you stories the world tried to bury. Subscribe now, and watch the next Modern War story right here, where we uncover another hidden chapter of the battlefield and the men who lived it. Every story is real. Every hero deserves to be remembered.